WorldSkills UK is a partnership between business, education and governments, and they unite experts from across the UK to run skills competitions for thousands of young people every year in key economic skill areas. They champion young people's training achievements and success at annual national finals, and then the top achievers, who then become Team UK, undergo further intense technical and mindset training to prepare them for international competitions. And these competitions are known as WorldSkills competitions. Now, these competitions were formerly called Skills Olympics, and they mirrored the Olympic Games. And the main purpose was to create a youth festival in which competitors would recognise their role in helping to construct the future. Individual excellence is recognised in sports and the arts, and it was for this reason that it was felt that achievements in vocational education and training were deserving of the same. These competitions have been held biannually for 70 years. The first national competition of the International Vocational Training Organisation took place in Spain in 1947. In 1950, Portugal joined, and in 1953, 5 other European countries, so Germany, Great Britain, which unfortunately is no longer in Britain, in Europe, France, Morocco and Switzerland participated in the event. Now, currently, the competition brings together around 1,600 contestants, mostly aged 16 to 22, from 60 different countries, including South Africa, who gather every 2 years to compete publicly and demonstrate excellence in 56 skill areas. It's important to note that not every country competes in every skill, but they provide as full a team as they possibly can. And the skill areas are grouped into 6 different skill sectors. So you've got construction and building technology, creative arts and fashion, information and communication technology, manufacturing and engineering technology, social and personal services, and transportation and logistics. These WorldSkills competitions are organised by WorldSkills International, and it's a non-profit association that promotes TVET internationally in traditional trades and crafts, as well as in multi-skilled vocations such as manufacturing team challenge, which is one of the few skills that go up to the age of 24. They also champion those trades and crafts utilising newer technologies and innovative services. And the competitors are tested and measured in their performance in work task simulations and practical tests, and they're awarded points by the judges. So in each skill area, the competitor with the most points over 500 is awarded gold, second most silver, third bronze, etc. Very similar to the sporting Olympics. And in addition, any other competitor in that skill who achieves a score of 500 or over, but didn't achieve gold, silver or bronze, is awarded a medallion of excellence. Now, excellence in TVET has existed in skill systems around the world for many decades. Economic prosperity has depended on it. However, research has shown that such excellence is often embedded in pockets. It's at different levels within stratified skill systems. So apprenticeships, for example, in India, Austria, and the United Kingdom, or in specific industries. And there's clearly a need to share models of best practice across contexts and systems at an international level. So that's what I'm presenting to you today, our findings from a comparative research project examining the mechanisms and drivers of technical excellence in 7 skills systems around the world. So our basic premise was that skills drive the economy. The skills taught and developed through the technical and vocational and training route are imperative for economic productivity and growth. And their importance for economic recovery post-pandemic, as well as Britain's future post-Brexit is clear. And the evidence shows that world-class skill systems underpinned by robust standards drive economic growth through improved productivity and inward investment. Around the world, the most successful skill systems are underpinned by a well-supported, respected and trained technical teaching workforce with structures in place to ensure the delivery of world-class technical education and training. So what the research highlighted was the close relationship between world-class teaching and training standards in the skill systems and enhanced productivity and economic growth. It illustrated the ways in which the most successful skill systems should be thought of as healthy and connected ecosystems with excellence and standards embedded at all levels, from policy structures, the macro, through institutional relationships between employers and training centres, the meso level, to CPD support and funding and individual teaching practice at the micro level. Across the case study countries, World Skills played a critical role in driving excellence within the national systems. Firstly, it supported the development of international benchmarks that ensured the standards in the skills system were at a world-class level. Secondly, the skills competitions and the associated training provided a third space for trainers and trainees to experiment with innovative pedagogic approaches and practices, and so responded to the latest technologies, industry developments, and emergent skills demands in an agile manner. What the study did was explicitly highlight how a successful skills system comprises a range of close relationships and dynamics between system-level policies, productivity and economic growth, industry needs, employer perspectives, technological developments, local organisations and training providers, and individual teaching practice. And World Skills acted as a bridging mechanism across the different levels of the system and across the different spaces. It illustrated the ways in which the most successful skills systems combine multi-level and multi-spatial dynamics with policy and practice that cut across local, national, and international dimensions and multiple organisations. We found that there is a distinct need for reconfiguring policy language around productivity to emphasise a skills economy. It's a concept I'll return to later in the talk. This reframing provides a critical reorientation that moves away from the dominance of knowledge economy thinking and takes into account the relationship between productivity and the shifting dynamics between skill supply and demand, the changing nature of work, spatial dynamics, and local economic variance. But before I move on to all that, I'll tell you how we actually conducted the study first. So this was our main research question. How do other countries with interesting or pioneering technical education systems develop the skills of their technical education workforce to ensure high quality teaching standards? The report draws on distinctive insights into global skills systems. Innovations and developments in other countries have long held fascination for policy makers and educators in the UK. And indeed, we have an entire field of international and comparative education. While taking regard of the cultural and political context, looking to other countries to understand better their education and training systems brings many advantages for policy learning and contextualized learning. And this is what we hope to achieve. The research endeavoured to show how other countries enable TVET to be at the forefront of curriculum and workforce development. And we did that through the research question. We spoke to a variety of different people across the 7 countries, World Skills delegates, teachers, policymakers, students, etc., chambers of commerce in Hungary. And so we had a total of, I think it's 57 interviews. So it was a 5-month research project led equally by us at Scope and the Edge Foundation. The study focused on the policy and governance structures of the TVET systems in Austria, Brazil, France, Hungary, India, Japan, and South Korea. Because what we wanted to do was gain an understanding of the drivers that they were using to develop and deliver technical excellence. It consisted of 3 phases. So phase 1 was a desk-based literature review of policy, academic, and grey literature. Phase 2 was the semi-structured interviews with the key stakeholders, and then phase 3 was the cross-country analysis. We adopted a snowball methodology. World Skills UK introduced us first to key World Skills members in each of the countries, and in turn, these World Skills members introduced us to key stakeholders in the wider TVET sector. In total, we collected 56 semi-structured interviews. We did them all online because of the pandemic, which we wouldn't have been able to travel to all these countries anyway, unfortunately, as amazing as that would have been. We conducted the interviews early this year, January 2021 through to April 2021, and they consisted of a series of questions around the purpose of TVET in those countries, curriculum development activities, teacher, tutor, lecturer recruitment and selection, CPD, assessment frameworks, student pathways and experiences, challenges the sector faced, positive policy developments, and the role of World Skills in each of the country's systems. We audio recorded and transcribed the interviews. Some of them lasted 45 minutes, some of them went through to an hour and a half. And to ensure anonymity, each participant was given a pseudonym in the form of a number and a letter. So later on, you'll see some quotes with sort of teacher one, which is teacher one, or P1, policymaker one, etc. So these 7 countries are all members of World Skills International. They enter a team in the World Skills competitions every 2 years. And stemming from these countries' involvement in these global skills competitions, policy changes and innovative practice at national and local level have developed, driving technical excellence and providing fertile ground for lessons for the UK. So for instance, I'll talk about it in a little bit more detail in a moment, but Hungary decided that they needed to revamp their system entirely. So they've thrown everything out and started from scratch. So we wanted to see sort of what, how, and why they had done that. The data shows that the policies surrounding TVET systems diverge, often radically, between the different countries, as you would expect, rooted in their own unique contexts and histories. Yet we saw similar patterns of where TVET fits into the wider education system and particularly the economic contexts, and the ways in which the key stakeholders conceptualize the sector, their role within it, the challenges they faced, and the best ways to embed excellence within TVET practice. The OECD have pointed out that TVET and much of its delivery is hidden. In part, this invisibility can be traced back to the number and types of students involved and the ways that TVET systems have developed. The picture illustrates the complexity in TVET across the 7 countries, all the while highlighting the art of the possible and the ingenuity readily available to ensure positive outcomes for as many young people as possible. Moreover, each country provides important lessons in terms of policy enactment and the roles that World Skills plays as an international organisation focused on developing high quality skill. We've really wanted to get away from the deficit model of TVET, of where policy is constantly changing it and trying to fix what's wrong. There's clearly pockets of excellence. There's clearly really good work happening globally, and we really wanted to focus on that excellence framing. So we focused on 3 different levels. The macro level, so the policy related structures that shape the way in which the purpose of TVET is conceptualized within policy contexts. The meso level, particularly the structural relationships between education providers and employers and the ways in which employers engage in and contribute to TVET. And the micro level, the art of teaching and the ways in which TVET teaching professionals navigate complex policy, professional orientated and social spaces to ensure high quality teaching and learning sits at the heart of their practice. So it was really, really clear across the case countries that World Skills played a critical role in the TVET systems. They helped to shape teaching standards and they were driving teaching excellence in its conceptualization and enactment. In the most successful skills systems, World Skills worked across the different specialties, bridging local, national and international contexts in ways that shaped standards, linked organisations and aligned skill supply with employer demands and facilitated innovative teaching practice. Growing dominance of conceptualising skills systems in terms of skills economies, enhanced productivity and economic growth. There was far more of an emphasis on that in the 7 countries than there has been in the UK. And what we also found was that World Skills allowed people to experiment. It gave them a third space. They do this through 3 main ways. Benchmarking international standards. I'm going to talk for a little bit, so don't be alarmed if the slides don't move. Participants across the case study countries emphasised the importance of standards in the skills systems. It was really clear that in the most successful systems, World Skills and skills competitions provided a mechanism for international benchmarking of standards. The majority of the skills systems do not have international comparative approaches built into standard setting. So as such, World Skills played a vital role in bringing world-class standards into national skill systems. Stakeholders across all the case countries emphasised that internationally competitive standards were critical in ensuring teaching staff were helping young people develop skills that were appropriate in increasingly globalised economic settings. This ensured enhanced productivity across local, national and international markets and national economic growth in relation to other countries. At the same time, embedding international standards in national skill systems was seen as critical in providing young people with the skills that would allow for national and international mobility. And the stakeholders also emphasised that the flexibility and international orientation of world skills meant that the standards could respond to employers' emerging skills demands, technological changes, and shifting industrial practice in a more agile way than could be achieved through centralised government standard setting. It meant that where world skills was properly embedded in skill systems, the standards they helped set were responsive, competitive, rooted in the needs of the skills economy and embedded in the local, national and international skills ecosystems. They were also really great at linking organisations. They were seen as sitting across the meso level activities in the TVET systems, and they worked closely with different unions, trade organisations and networks of individual employers. It often took place through individuals, with world skills representatives working closely within their industry specialisms. But the stakeholders reported that this facilitated employers' understandings of education and training and helped them to think creatively about ways in which skills development could be effectively embedded in the workplace in internships, placements, and apprenticeships. At the same time, participants emphasised that the close working relationships between world skills and employers helped those involved in delivering training understand the changing needs of the sectors they worked in, ensuring that they kept abreast of regulatory changes, technological developments, and changing industry practices. And this could then be reflected in the ways in which they structured competitions and associated training. Importantly, as many of the representatives often had roles that sat across world skills and other parts of the TVET system, many of these participants explained how they were ideally placed to feed their up-to-date knowledge of industry developments directly into the skills system. And they often provided informal and sometimes formal CPD to colleagues. And then the third way was through supporting innovation. So from a teaching perspective, participants directly involved in world skills also emphasised that competitions had a vital role to play in driving teaching innovation. They argued that the process of supporting and preparing trainees for competitions gave them the time and space to experiment with different pedagogical approaches and think more innovatively about their teaching practice. And as I said, they had a number of roles, and those that were actually teaching in training colleges then took that knowledge back to the training colleges with them. The time was seen as distinct from the training that takes place on the job, where the emphasis was always on speed and ensuring the employer makes money. It was really about skill development. While experimentation is critical for innovation and excellence, the participants noted that this could not always be achieved in the workplace where a job or task simply needs completing. And so training for the world skills competitions, therefore, was seen as providing a crucial educational space to rethink processes in an environment where it was okay to get it wrong. Not during the competition, of course, but while training. This was highlighted both in terms of experimenting with skills-related processes, but also in terms of experimenting with technologies that support learning. And this was an issue that was seen as particularly important in a COVID-19 context. So world skills could be seen as operating in this kind of third space, sitting between formal education and training in the workplace. It operated as a safe space where trainers and trainees could experiment with skills, processes, and pedagogy, while also providing a bridging mechanism to bring work-based innovations and developments into the training process in a way that could respond to those emerging technological changes and shifting industry practice, which is often a criticism of further education colleges, particularly here in the UK. It was most apparent in the more stable economies, especially those with established TVET systems such as France and Austria, for example. However, this element was still developing in several of the case countries, most notably India and Brazil, where world skills was in the process of establishing itself. And in these contexts, world skills representatives were navigating highly febrile policy contexts. Instability at a macro level in terms of both economic activity and TVET policy could clearly be seen as creating a context that inhibited the creation of a third space that allowed that promotion of innovation, standard setting, or teaching excellence. But underpinning all of this was the employers. This valuing of employers, skills development in the workplace and is common among our European counterparts, whereby they locate TVET and the skills development within it in the context of the economy and economic development. And so placing employers at the heart was imperative to this successful talent development. And some of the countries are doing it really well, as I'll go on to talk about. All of this results in a complex dynamic between people, policy, and practice. Across the case countries, it was possible to see those complex dynamics in each of the skill systems, and the ways in which these three key elements were inexorably linked and interacted in the complex and dynamic social contexts could be seen as a fundamental driver of technical excellence. In the most successful contexts, the skills systems were underpinned by supportive policy structures, social discourses that valued vocational pathways, and a skilled and valued technical teaching workforce. These three aspects could be seen as mutually constitutive. So positive public discourses feeds into supportive policy frameworks and empowered workforce. Strong TVET policies shape public discourse, embedding prestige into the skill system and supports the workforce. And then excellent practice drives productivity, shapes public discourse, and guides economic and skills policy. So this complex dynamic between people, policy, and practice could be seen as both a fundamental driver of excellence within the skill systems, but a critical driver of the skills economy, ensuring that strong links exist between skill systems, productivity, and economic growth. So I'm going to talk about each of these factors for a little bit. So people. Primarily, the people involved in the TVET system in each of the 7 countries were a key driver of excellence, without a doubt. South Korea, for example, emphasised that the quality of educators was directly linked to the quality of TVET. In India, it was the ever-increasing importance and input from employers that was contributing not only to the short-term skilling ecosystem, but also helping to shape the long-term one. And even in more established TVET systems, such as Austria, employers could help drive change in work-based VET courses. In France, the World Skills representatives were instrumental in experimenting with different pedagogical approaches to help build different skills. And they're all key examples of people responsible for driving change and building excellence. When thinking about the educators and trainers involved in world skills competitions and in TVET more broadly, it's important to note that even though teacher qualification requirements and CPD varied greatly across the 7 countries, the common thread was the teachers, trainers, instructors' passion for their subject and the focus on their students. So just an illustration, in Japan, all teachers emphasize the importance of practical and hands-on demonstration workshops. And this means that the teachers spend more time directly with students, demonstrating skills and supporting students' development of these skills. So even when Japan entered a state of emergency in the height of the pandemic last year, their vocational schools still offered face-to-face teaching. And this decision apparently came purely from their teaching philosophy that student-teacher interaction was a crucial driving force for success in TVET. In Hungary, teachers were keen to make sure that they were also abreast of changing industry standards and curriculum standards, and indicated they wanted more CPD to enable them to be the best teachers they could be in VET. And with the policy changes that I was talking about, they're actually thinking of mandating, I think it's about 60 hours per year, which doesn't sound like a huge amount, but given the current is 0, they welcomed 60. 2 countries in particular had adopted specific measures to improve the status of vocational teachers. So in India, with the move to sector skills councils, there was a push to involve industry-trained instructors, creating a better link to industry. In Hungary, attempts had been made to improve the status of teachers. So as part of those policy changes, the government recently changed the name and status of TVET teachers, and they were now referred to as instructors, and were no longer public employees. And they also received a salary increase of 30% to try and raise their status and the attractiveness of the job. So employers are key stakeholders in driving excellence, as we all know. A great example can be seen in the role that employers are playing in India's TVET system. In the automotive sector, there are examples of companies setting up their own training schools to provide not only short-term skilling courses, but also to help with skills competitions at the national and international level. And in Austria, with 98% of SMEs, employers are at the core of work-based learning. And importantly, in part of any company's ethos in the country is the tradition, long-standing tradition of training young people. And they do have, as I said, a well-structured system for doing this, as you would expect of Austria. One of the things that became really apparent to us with regard to the people was the social and familial influence on student choice. So policymakers, teachers, employers, and other key stakeholders were providing ways and means to promote the vocational route. Excuse me. And insofar as these had proven to be successful, there was a tension evident in the social and familial influence on student choice around TVET. So I don't mean to paint just a completely rosy picture. There of course were tensions in this aspect of people. And the tension was high across all countries, and it needs to be taken into account for the positive development of TVET. So in Japan, parents traditionally placed a higher emphasis on traditional academic education rather than vocational education. But the vocational schools have been not only successful in attracting secondary school graduates, but also university graduates who were not able to secure employment upon graduation, and they were returning to school to do a TVET qualification. And there are a variety of different reasons for that, which I'll talk about in a moment. But these findings were similar in India. Traditionally, Indian parents place a high priority and regard for traditional academic education. However, through World Skills, they were seeing success in changing this perception. And part of that was along the lines of them providing the short courses as well as the longer term courses, which was a policy imperative. In South Korea, there is a very negative perception around TVET and a strong social stigma. And a lot of the students in TVET were from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and all of the people that we spoke to said that in South Korea there was a long way to go, but they were actually making strides. And the stereotype of students being less academic was dominant across all of the countries. In Austria, a common typecast of a vocational school student was that they were worse at subjects like German and English, but good or average at maths. Likewise, there was also a trend for more young people with an immigrant background to do vocational training. The perception that TVET was a second-class route was no different in France, and was often perpetuated by the fact that students who struggled at school or were disruptive were pushed into vocational courses and apprenticeships. However, most of the countries were giving more prominence, while most of the countries were given more prominence to higher education in recent decades, they were all starting to change the narrative around TVET. They could see the importance of skills and were developing their policies accordingly. And they were especially using World Skills as a driver for change of perceptions. So for instance, in India and South Korea, you know, if you won a medal, you were encouraged to go back and teach in the schools, but you were given a house and a brand new car, and there were all these various incentives, and they were sort of held up as role models in the same way that football players are here. And it was really changing the narrative. These young people, part of what they signed up to in competing and getting the extra training was that they would then do some community work, and they would go and speak in schools. And this was really helping to change young people's minds. The positioning of TVET pathways in relation to academic educational routes had a profound impact on the nature of those pathways. The nature of the policy interventions and the cultures and practices of the teaching workforce. And so raising the esteem of TVET was a policy priority in many of the countries. In Austria, there were well-defined TVET routes, as I've mentioned, that have a rich and successful history, not dissimilar to its German neighbour. But there were other challenges. So even though a smaller percentage of students in Brazil follow the vocational route, TVET was considered to have a central role in the education system. And vocational courses were being designed according to the needs of business. Therefore, students entered the job market with the skills that businesses were looking for. And a lot of that came from World Skills, where businesses were really getting involved in the TVET system. In France, there remains a value-based distinction between the academic and technological baccalaureates, those referred to as the intellectuals, and the vocational track, where the students are referred to as the manuals. However, there were big reforms in 2018, and these were seen as having a positive impact on the value placed on vocational pathways. And these policy changes appeared to be making a notable change on both the numbers of apprentices and vocational students and the training structures and resourcing, despite the impact of COVID. In Japan, we found that even though I mentioned, a high focus on HE, they have a highly structured and multi-layered TVET system, and they were combining this with high quality industry links, for example, Toyota, and they've seen positive changes to the perception of vocational training. In addition, in Japan, for some industry sectors which have offered society an essential lifeline during the global pandemic, for example, medicine, nursing, security, social care, electronic engineering, there have been significant changes in perception. And interestingly, the Kosen colleges, which have the highest level of esteem of all vocational institutes in Japan, all their teaching staff must obtain a PhD, and their graduates have a good track record of high employment rates. Now, I'm certainly not advocating for PhDs in our TVET teaching force, but it's interesting the way that was felt, that was improving the prestige. What they were finding, that enrollments in these TVET institutions and courses were now growing after a period of continuous decline. In South Korea, the government's committed to promoting and encouraging more students to access TVET by increasing employer involvement in TVET policy development. And they've recently implemented the recent creation of sector skills councils as well, and Meister schools. And graduating from these schools largely guarantees students employment. In addition, the government in South Korea were promoting a work first, study later program, which was encouraging students from vocational high schools to work in companies before entering higher education to tackle the issue of overeducation, as well as increase the practical skill and competency from field experiences. So we could see the way that social and familial structures shaped student choice across all of the case countries, and how these intersected with economic factors shaping the nature of TVET policy and practice. And ultimately, this policy development helped determine the space in which the TVET workforce was able to engage and shape the nature of excellence in teaching and the way that it manifested in practice. So globally, TVET routes have expanded and contracted according to contextual market requirements. There were several examples of good practice that helped shape the TVET systems in the 7 countries. Practices that were based on world skills experiences and excellence at this level feeding into the TVET systems. Some of this practice was historical and cultural, and in other countries, as I mentioned, Hungary was being completely reshaped. Practice was being completely reshaped through policy. A policymaker in Japan emphasized that vocational education is often historically associated with being dirty, manual, relentless, and rough, but highlighted that in reality, there are in fact a huge range of new emergent categories of vocational education. And I won't even attempt to pronounce this in Japanese, but the translation is follow your dream type occupations. And there were a wide range of occupations that have become available to young people, reflective of the rapid change of economies around the world and the many subjects undertaken at university that are seen to be vocational. So within TVET, there was clearly a lot of good practice developing and utilised to provide young people taking the TVET route with the skills and knowledge required to learn and earn. In India, the trainers described the care that was taken to develop competencies and skills that would potentially have been lost without formal support. This was particularly evident in the textile industry, where some of the handloom crafts were a dying art form, and the Sector Skills Council had taken an active stance to create more formal training practices for young people so that these skills could be developed outside of the villages where these crafts were centred. The development of this practice meant that a traditional skill would not die out, and that there were new areas of work that were being created for young people to learn. Across the 7 countries, the emphasis on excellence in teaching and setting standards was absolutely clear. As I mentioned, some of this is historical and deeply cultural. So, for example, in Austria, the entry into and requirements for TVET teachers were regulated by the state. All TVET teachers were required to have a bachelor level teaching qualification, of which the particular type of teacher training qualification depended on the type of TVET teacher they were. Recent reforms in 2015 to 2019 of the teacher training curricula had occurred across the board, and it included competence orientation at its core. So the curricula focused on general pedagogical competence, subject-related and didactic competence, diversity and gender competence, and social competence and awareness of the profession. And they could see positive changes there. In Hungary, despite all the recent policy changes, there have been no attempts so far to change the initial teacher training. However, the in-company trainers had to pass a master craftsman examination that included the development of teaching skills. Teaching excellence in France was linked with understanding the needs of trainees. So also important was the emphasis of the teaching workforce in understanding business needs. So there was a real emphasis on those two aspects in France. And much policy change in India had focused significant effort on behalf of the government to professionalise training in the sector, with the sector skills councils responsible for instigating the training of trainer TOT centres to ensure that all trainers of vocational courses have industry relevant training and were certified to the same standards of quality. Oops. In terms of policy, the third pillar, we all know that TVET is often at the mercy of policy churn. For example, in the UK, voter constituents offer more objections to changes in the academic route, and so it seems that the TVET system can be most easily tinkered with. In some countries, this tinkering, we saw it at the edge, so Brazil, France, and Japan, and in others, it was the entire system. As I mentioned, Hungary, there were big changes in India and bigger changes in South Korea. Insofar as improving the attractiveness of TVET was a policy issue, funding was one of the ways to drive excellence of this route. And in India, large amounts of funding are being poured into developing a comprehensive TVET system. In Hungary, it was believed that system-wide changes led to real change in TVET rather than reforming individual aspects of the system, hence their holistic approach. And while funding does not always match the breadth and depth of change, interviewees agreed that the current structures, systems, and approaches in TVET point in the right direction. Another clear driver of excellence was the use of world skills in these countries at a policy level. So, for example, in India, the role of regional and national skills competitions in raising the profile of TVET was helping to build a more positive perception. As I mentioned, winning medals allowed young competitors to return to their homes, sometimes rural homes, with not only the prestige, but also the cash incentive. And in some cases, government support for enhanced education and training in that area, because of that competitor, added to the ecosystem of skilling. Policy that allowed for world skills to impact more broadly on the TVET system, combined with concrete expectations such as the requirement of CPD hours. So, for example, in Austria, they have a requirement of 15 hours a year, was having much impact. But what we could actually see was the impact on the economic structures. The conceptualization of teaching excellence and the way in which it was embedded within the TVET system was rooted in the way in which the purposes of TVET were conceptualized and embedded in policy. Broadly speaking, the countries conceptualized the purposes of TVET in two main ways: primarily economic, and to offer a quality route to those students who, for a variety of reasons, follow the vocational route. And the 7 countries developed educational policies in response to different economic structures and needs. This meant that the relationship between the purpose of TVET, the economy, and policy played out quite differently across the case studies. And I'm just going to take you on a whirlwind global tour. So, for instance, in Austria, there are clearly well-defined TVET routes that had a rich and successful history. And an important part of a company's ethos was that tradition of training young people. And the companies tended to have a well-structured system for doing this, which was very closely linked to the economy. They have high-quality TVET courses which have esteem. They've got a large proportion of their non-tertiary graduates employed. They I mean, they just have that long history, and they have that link with unions, which I think is really helpful. That wasn't apparent in the other countries. Time. Thinking about Brazil, even though a much smaller percentage of students in Brazil follow the vocational route, TVET was considered to have a central role in the educational system, albeit subordinate to the academic route. Even so, vocational courses were designed according to the needs of business, and therefore students were entering the job market with the skills that business was looking for. And these TVET students were described as being advantaged in comparison to students who only completed high school, because they felt they'd already gained a professional identity and skills. And it was really interesting to hear them talking about the way that businesses were actually engaging with TVET and through the processes. They were all willing to acknowledge that they still had a long way to go. And you can see that from the percentage of students that are actually involved in the TVET route on the slide there. France, as I mentioned, there remains a value-based distinction between the academic and technological baccalaureate. But, you know, the 2018 reforms were seen as having a positive impact. And the policy changes appeared to be having a notable impact on both the numbers of apprentices and vocational students and the training structures and resources. There was more funding going in. In Hungary, there have just been radical changes in TVET since the change of government in 2010. There was a change in direction whereby the TVET system moved from a very decentralized to an increasingly centralized system. Two major reforms in TVET were seen as the vehicle for economic growth and a remedy for social problems. The first one was under the new government. The education law for TVET was published in 2011, and it came into force in January 2012. And changes included institutional structures, governance, social partners' involvement, and content and delivery of TVET. And the second was the 2020 Vocational Education Law, which fundamentally changed every aspect of the TVET system. The scale of the latter transformation was considerably different from any previous transformation, which had included system-wide changes. And the law serves as the basis for the comprehensive midterm strategic policy plan, which they're calling Vocational Training 4.0 strategy. Of the 7 countries, Hungary had seen the most major transformation of its TVET system. And they were the ones that were really, in their curriculum development, were incorporating those World Skills International standards, not dissimilar to how Russia did a few years ago after hosting a World Skills competition. Much easier to do when you have that type of government, though. India. TVET in India continues to be inextricably linked to jobs and wages in the minds of both students and parents. This means that until there is significant change in the employment opportunities provided to students after they complete their skill training, there's still going to be deeply entrenched societal perceptions of TVET. But the people that we spoke to, our interviewees, really felt that perceptions were changing. They felt that traditional formal, while that is preferred, they can see that people are realizing the importance of both, and realizing that none can exist, that a blend is required of skills development and academic learning. And this was a push that they were making. One of the ways that policymakers sought to increase aspiration for TVET in India was to make skills-related learning more accessible and part of mainstream education. So this was part of the planning that they were doing around short-term courses, which were 3 to 4 month courses that students could take in high school, but all the way through adult learning. I mentioned that in Japan, they've got a highly structured and multi-layered TVET system combined with high-quality industry training and links. Some industry sectors, as I said, have been offering that essential lifeline and have been considered more an option for some students. There is an apparent lack of parity of STEAM between the manual and non-manual routes within TVET. And so they were really trying to change that. But interestingly, in Japan, you can see that there are 4 different levels of vocational programs and schools that they can go into. So they were trying to increase that number, the 23% of young people enrolled in TVET, and increase it up to 30% by, I think it was 2025. In South Korea, the government was really committed to promoting and encouraging more students to access TVET by increasing employer involvement in policy development. And as I mentioned, there is the creation of the new sector skills councils and the Meister schools. But what's really interesting in South Korea is that they've got two ministries responsible for TVET. So vocational education, the theoretical side, falls under the Ministry of Education. And vocational training, the developing the technical skills, the practical element, is under the Ministry of Employment and Labour. And they felt that while that was still the case, that our interviewees felt while that was still the case, it was always going to be difficult because there were always conflicting arrangements. And so they really felt that until they sorted out the policy side of it, the people and the practice would come later. What we can see is that these social structures related to the prestige of the TVET pathways is very complex. The way in which student choice was shaped across all the case studies formed a critical part of the macro level structures, and these intersected with the economic factors shaping the nature of the TVET policy and practice. And it's ultimately this policy development that determined the space in which the TVET workforce was able to engage and shaped the nature of excellence in teaching and the way it was manifested in practice. The relationship between the purpose of TVET, the different economic needs of the case study countries, and the strategic approaches of governments could be seen as setting the critical parameters for vocational educational policy. These parameters establish the social and cultural space in TVET, in which TVET practitioners taught and influenced the ways in which teaching excellence was conceptualized, its prestige, and was embedded in policy and practice. And all of these features underpin a successful skills economy. A focus on the skills economy in the UK is important for a number of reasons. And that's why the World Skills commissioned this work because they wanted to understand what was happening in the other countries. And the reason it's important in the UK is, first, skills are developed across the tertiary education sector and workplaces. Unlike a focus solely on the knowledge economy, incorporating the skills economy allows for this broadened understanding of where skills are developed. Second, it showcases the development of skills excellence, highlighting the extraordinary work already occurring in providing high-level skills and the quality that the UK skills system can deliver. And third, it places skills at the heart of the economy, where they make impact in terms of international trade, development and investment, especially in growth sectors providing job opportunities. And fourth, it places employers at the forefront of training development to work with the UK's high calibre further and higher education institutions. Supply side has for a long time focused on higher education, and higher education institutions have been seen as the main vehicle for skilled employment. Government policies have been strongly influenced by the idea that higher education improves students' knowledge and skills levels, which then improve productivity and economic performance. While HEIs, predominantly universities, are clearly playing an important role in terms of the knowledge economy, generating intellectual property, the skills economy focuses on understanding and recognising the skills underpinning the knowledge developed. A good illustration is the vaccine development for the current COVID-19 pandemic. Great minds have been involved in the vaccines development in conjunction with many finely honed, high-quality skills from technicians helping to produce and deliver it globally. In a symbiotic way, knowledge and skills have coalesced to provide an answer to a global health and economic crisis. A skills economy is underpinned by the development of high-quality skills and creates jobs that are valued by all members of society. Interestingly, and despite Brexit, the UK is aligning skills policy more with Europe, as outlined in the recent Skills for Jobs white paper. And many countries globally, similar to the UK, have recognised that making the TVET route attractive needs to be a policy priority, especially if we are to continue to solve these global problems which are going to come at us. I don't think the pandemic is the last one. Indeed, underpinning this imperative for esteem for the TVET route is the understanding that quality of provision and teaching standards are inextricably linked to prestige. So, for example, the Kosen colleges in Japan. These institutions strive to move from competence to excellence in a similar vein to the world skills training managers who work in UK further education. A clear message is that employers, education and training providers and policymakers must work together in any endeavour to improve the quality and prestige in TVET, making it an attractive pathway. None of the case study countries were looking in isolation at various people. They were all making sure that it was a united endeavour. To do this requires a long-term strategic approach, an approach that incorporates and places importance on the skills economy as much as the knowledge economy. And I'm going to finish there. And I can see there's a few Q&A questions, so I'll stop sharing and allow some discussion rather than me just talking.
Thanks very much, Susan. That was really interesting and I think amazingly upbeat and positive for a TVET presentation. So that was really, really great to have some good news stories to share and some examples of where things have actually changed and improved. So that's absolutely fantastic. And we really, really appreciated that. And I really enjoyed listening to it. And I think other people also did. There's already some comments in the chat and in the Q&A. In the Q&A, one person wanted you to just restate who the country where teachers had their are no longer state employees and their salaries increased by 30%.
That was Hungary.
Who is the employer and what led to that transition and how long is their contract under the new employer? That's a question. And then there's another question in the Q&A. Don't people, amongst other reasons, educate to improve their economic status? So apart from the supply side, improving the quality of VET, shouldn't the employers, industries and governments as consumers of VET skills pay equal to general education graduates or more if VET skills improve productivity or growth? Yeah, that's those are the questions that I've got so far.
Okay.
And just to remind everyone to please do put your questions in the Q&A, but also we would be thrilled if you actually raise your hand and speak your questions so that we can get some other voices and other faces on the screens. So please also do feel free to do that.
Okay, so that country was Hungary, and the employer becomes the training institute. What led to that transition? Andrea Lachik wrote a really interesting paper that I can put in the chat or send to Prisha to share, as well as the reference for the report that we wrote that this research came from. I think the transition would be long-standing. I don't know exactly how long their contract is under the new employer. Again, I think we'd need to check Andrea's paper on that. Part of the difficulty of doing a 7-country state case study is that you get the breadth, but not necessarily the depth that you would like. And also the report is nearly 50 pages long, and in an hour's presentation, I couldn't get to all the details. So I'm afraid that I'm not going to be able to answer the question about the contract with the new employer. But in Andrea's paper, you'd be able to find that. Don't people look, I agree completely. I think the employers and industries should be paying as well. It's a constant conundrum, who pays? And even now in Germany, you know, they're struggling with that question of who should pay. I don't know the answer to it. I think, I mean, in the UK, they were talking about introducing student loans for people taking VET courses. I'm not sure whether that took off or not. So there is this element of putting it more onto the individual to improve their own economic status. That's quite a philosophical question that if we were meeting in person would be the perfect one to continue over a glass of wine, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a really tricky question, but it is a very real one in the sense of, you know, this whole issue that came up at various points in your presentation and that comes up in all TVET work on status. I think Pandalani's question really does hit it, because you can't really change status without actually, you know, changing it materially, and not just changing it in terms of, you know, as politicians like to do here, and I'm sure in other countries, you know, come on everyone, TVET's just as good. Put adverts on TV saying so. So I think Pandalani's question is really going to the heart of that, and it is a really, really crucial question. And it goes to that, I mean, and as you say, Susan, there's all sorts of issues about what work is rewarded in our current economic system and what work isn't, and those are complex issues. I've got 2 more questions for you. How well do South African participants perform at World Skills competitions? And please, can you comment on the integration between formal or accredited qualifications under national systems and informal or private providers generating training to meet specific technical requirements? That may not be something that your study looked at all. But if it did, Robert and Ferguson would love some more insight into it.
So with regards to how well South Africa does, I don't think they're putting in a huge team each year. All the results are available on the World Skills International website. The next competition, it ordinarily happens in odd years. So it should have happened this year, but because of the pandemic, it's not. It's in Shanghai in 2022. I don't know the size of the team that South Africa will be fielding, but you can go back over previous ones. So the last one was in 2019 in Kazakhstan, I think it was. And that's when I think, no, it can't have been Kazakhstan. Anyway, Putin turned up to one of them and had not heard about these World Skills competitions before and thought they were amazing, and went back and declared that the current curriculum needed to be completely thrown out and changed, and the international standards incorporated and benchmarked, which is what I referred to in my presentation. I can't see that happening in any other country around the world. I can see in the UK, in those colleges where our training managers are working, you can definitely see standards improving. So hopefully we'll get South Africa having a better team, and there's definitely impacts coming from having people competing in World Skills competitions that are beneficial. In terms of the integration between formal and informal, the country, I won't be able to talk in depth, but the countries were definitely approaching it in different ways. So Brazil and India in particular, with these 3 to 4 month courses, they were more informal. They didn't necessarily come out with a big qualification at the end. It was more a certificate of participation, but it was about getting people into employment. So depending on the country, they were, and their populations and the size of their populations, Brazil and India are huge. They were trying to integrate the informal with the formal across a variety of different sectors, thinking about the ones where they needed people the most. So that economic imperative. But Robin, I'm sorry, we didn't go into any more detail than that with the project.
I have given Nduvo Ramolongo speaking status because she raised her hand to ask a question. And Polisi Gugusha, who did not raise his hand to ask a question, but made a comment, in the Q&A on South Africa's participation in world skills, and I just thought it would be great to hear from you, Khulisi, on this issue. So if you wouldn't mind coming in on the issue. I know you didn't actually ask to speak, so I'm hoping that you will, because it would be great to hear a comment on South Africa's. So this is someone who knows about South Africa's participation. But first, I'll give over to you, Nduvo.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, Professor Relly. Thank you for that insightful presentation, as well as the great content that your podcasts offer on the debates in TVET. They're really useful, so thank you for that. So my question is very general. So we struggle with a lot of parity of esteem in relation to our TVET system in South Africa. And so I just wanted to ask you, what do you think about embedding technical, vocational, and occupationally oriented subjects in the basic schooling system? And I say occupationally or vocationally oriented because the point is just to ensure that learners have some sort of foundational knowledge. And do you think that providing this foundational knowledge does help improve the TVET system and or increase enrollment in TVET post-schooling? Because, we also struggle a bit with that and which courses learners enroll into. Thank you.
That's a really interesting question. I mean, the UK have tried at various points to incorporate technical and vocational education into general education. We had GNVQs, General National Vocational Qualifications, which didn't work out and no longer exist. There's been a whole variety of different policy initiatives to try and do that. I don't have any data to answer the last part of your question. I don't know whether it does improve enrollments into vocational education courses. I'm actually a very staunch believer that we shouldn't be looking for parity of esteem. It's a very Anglo-centric concept. The English are obsessed with it. Our European counterparts don't look for it. They're looking for prestige in its own right. And we're never going to get parity of esteem between the academic and the vocational route. There are a whole variety of reasons why we won't get it, but the primary reason why we shouldn't be looking for it is because they are different routes with different outcomes for different people. And we need both of them in order to have successful outcomes for all of society, and then the economic impacts. So the pictures that I had at the beginning and the end of my presentation with the two young girls who were actually at World Skills competitions. So in the UK, what happens is when they're doing the team selection, they run national competitions. And prior to the pandemic, these were in the NEC at Birmingham, and they're huge. And on a Thursday, they run Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and the Thursday is specifically for schools to be able to go. Now, unfortunately, it tends to be the schools in, the Midlands who can get to the Birmingham for a school excursion. What was amazing was you saw that young girl having to go up bricklaying. They have these have a go sessions, and it's that kind of a thing that we need. I'm not convinced that we need it as part of the school curriculum, but kids need to be able to understand the various options that are out there for them, rather than sort of this push that they will just go through to higher education. And I understand the irony that I work for a higher education institution, yet I'm advocating not everyone go. But I think until we get more of that situation where young people realize the options that are available to them, and that higher education isn't the only route, it won't matter what we put into the general curriculum in terms of occupations and vocations. It's the curriculum. It's about actually having eyes open, having an understanding of what's available and what's out there. And so, these young girls who got to have a go at bricklaying, and it was breaking down gender barriers all over the place. There were young boys trying traditionally female occupations, floristry, hairdressing, and it was absolutely brilliant. And their eyes lit up and they were so excited. And, you know, there were young girls doing plumbing and car painting, and all sorts of different occupations. And I think actually that's what we need more of, because until we're not going to get people choosing, people who would ordinarily go to higher education choosing TVET as a viable alternative until it becomes a viable alternative, and that's through them knowing about it. I could go on about this. It's a bit of a pet soapbox of mine, so I will stop there. But I think we've got to think about having prestige for TVET in its own right, not as a comparator to the academic route.
I 100% agree with you, Susan. I think that's why the qualifications framework obsession is so completely unhelpful.
Yep.
It's just not going to make any difference. And when the focus is on parity of esteem, no one believes it anyway. And it actually goes back to Pandalani's question. You know, either these qualifications lead to reasonable and reasonably paid jobs, or it doesn't matter what you say about parity of esteem in the education system.
Exactly.
I am trying to get Nkolisi Gugushi to speak. Yes, are you going to come in, Nkolisi?
Hi, Stephanie. Yes, thanks. Can everyone hear me loud and clear?
Wonderful.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to take this opportunity very quickly to thank you know, our hosts and Wits Real for making this webinar series possible. I think I've been an avid attendee from the word go. So I just wanted to formally thank all. I think there's a plethora of knowledge and insights that are shared, and we can all learn so much from these sessions. I think they're absolutely valuable. Yes, coming to Kazan, in 2019, we were invited as EWCETA. We did sponsor, I think, a couple of the contestants within the sectors that we're involved in, particularly water and energy. And overall, it was a fantastic experience. I think a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, which I'm forever grateful for. As South Africa, I think our learners presented themselves very well. You know, our country was well received. We were humble in our nature, knowing that we were sort of the underdogs at these Olympics in inverted commas. And it's a huge undertaking, you know, thinking of the investment, the level of time and financial resources that go into just the planning, let alone the implementation of the events. But overall, I think we have much to learn from the rest of the world as South Africa, not in terms of the quality of skills particularly, but in terms of our competitiveness, which I think is a fundamental difference between the two. In theory, you know, our learners are highly skilled. They know exactly what they're doing. We see it in our impact studies that we've been doing over the years now, of how presentable they are to the markets across our economy. And you know, the skill level is so articulate that a lot of our learners are able to go on to start their own businesses if they fail to be employed for whatever reasons. And we can blame the economy, but I think it goes much deeper than just economic issues. You know, there are other you know, fundamental issues that we need to be cognizant of. But overall, I think if we can get over certain hurdles, and for me, honestly, it's more of a mental sort of block than being physically able to do or physically being able to compete at international level. It's more of perhaps maybe we're a little too frightened when we get to the stage, and it's time to now showcase what we're really capable of. Though I mean, we were so proud of our learners. It was a fantastic experience. They made us very proud, irrespective of the final results. I was a bit disappointed that we weren't awarded in certain areas. I thought we did exceptionally well, but it is a competition and there can only be so many winners. We did put together a report on the particular event from our perspective, of course, as attendees. So, you know, I'd be happy to share that perhaps through Prisha if you could maybe send me a request email. We haven't published the report in any way, but this would just be obviously for this platform to share, just to share experiences and knowledge, and for anybody's interest. You know, it's written in a very sort of newsletter format, nothing that would be too technical or too wordy. You know, we want it to be something that staff back at EWCETA would read for themselves, and our certain stakeholders, you know, who would be interested in reading on such information. I think it's a brilliant platform to explore the Q&As. I would have loved to have seen South Africa participating in such studies. We can learn so much. But one thing I must say is that there is a huge misconception around South African TVET colleges and the quality of training. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the quality of training. I need to emphasize that. Learners who attend TVET colleges are very capable and are highly skilled. So we need to change this perception. And I think this is part of the mental block I referred to earlier. We carry that at world stage level. We carry that burden on our shoulders, and that's something we need to move away from. But I think such studies would also help us to open our eyes to the possibilities and gather that that confidence that we need. And that's what I saw lacking. If there was anything really that I could pinpoint when it came to our learners' competitiveness, it was confidence, you know, but the skill was there, the dedication, you could see it in their faces. You know, it was so heartwarming to see what our young learners are doing out there. And generally speaking, I think the World Skills Platform goes to prove the quality of skills development at that level is phenomenal. It's amazing what young people are capable of doing. So I think it's just changing the mindset and preparing ourselves for greater things to come, especially for the subsequent and upcoming competitions. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Mkhalisi. That was really, really interesting and great to hear from you, and great to hear about South Africa's participation. And Susan, next time, please also include us in your study. I don't know if you want to comment at all, Susan, before I hand over to the next question.
I would definitely have included South Africa. The countries were already chosen in the brief that we tendered for. So we unfortunately didn't get any say in that. I think though, I'm really trying to have a positive narrative around TVET. There is, as I mentioned, the deficit, and you know, we're always looking at what can be improved and what's wrong, and so trying to change that narrative around it. Having said that, there are issues with world skills. It has been accused and can very much so be accused of being elitist. And I take your point about, you know, the South African competitors, you know, getting onto the world stage and lacking confidence. Other countries literally take their team, once they know who their team is, they take them out of circulation, they pay their employer so the employer is not running at a deficit. And these young people are hothoused for at least the 12 months before the competition, if not a little bit longer, to ensure that they have that confidence on all of those other performance skills that a high performing athlete would get. The UK doesn't do it quite to that extent, but they definitely are taken out and trained, and so that's a huge cost to training for a very small group of people, which is why a number of countries can't do it. And I imagine South Africa would be one of those countries. Australia doesn't do that. And the UK, as I said, do various bits and pieces, but the young person is still employed. Their employer is not being paid off for that young person's time for the 18 months. So there are a whole variety of different factors. And it reminds me of that cartoon that you'll see of all the different animals lined up. And you've got the teacher there saying, right, and you're all going to start off from an equal base, the starting line. And the test is that you've got to climb that tree. And, you know, one of the people is a monkey who's obviously going to do very well. And you've got a shark and you've got a crocodile and you've got an elephant who clearly aren't going to be able to. So even though they're starting off on a supposed equal footing, the outcome is going to be, the educational outcome is going to be very, very different. And that's a little bit of what's happening with these skills competitions, which I know I said I wanted to keep it positive, but, you know, we have to be realistic about what these skills competitions are doing in terms of those actual competitors. And so what we've tried to do is think about the broader benefits. And one of those is focusing on the training managers, the UK training managers who do get paid extra above their normal job, teaching in FE, and come back. And what's been fascinating is the way that they have then changed their teaching and their pedagogy to affect a wider group of people. And we've worked out that would be about 8,000 students in any 2-year cycle by them going back and teaching in their FE college. And I think it's that we need to focus on, perhaps more than just the competitors, is those wider impacts of policy and practice that we can actually change.
That's really interesting, Susan. And I have to say, it was something that I was wondering about during your presentation, but I didn't want to dampen the story. I mean, I think all of these things are complex, and I mean, I didn't actually know the extent to which there's that kind of hot housing, which I suppose is predictable, but kind of depressing. Mm-hmm. But the other thing I was wondering about is, you know, it's much easier to produce a tiny number of incredibly high-performing participants in an international competition than it is to change a system. And so that's what I found interesting about your take on this whole issue, is participating in this prestigious competition having any feedback into the systems. And I think that for me, that's a really interesting question. I have a question from Hans. Hans, I've given you, I've put you on the panel so that you can ask your question, so that we can get more voices into the space.
Thank you very much, Steph. Let me take the opportunity to thank our presenter. She's been wonderful. Anytime I see a mathematical equation, it excites me. And looking at skills economy plus knowledge economy equals economic productivity. Now, looking at the Ghanaian context in this equation, Ghana has 90% informal sector. And we keep producing a lot of graduates through the normal educational system, to the point we currently having a free senior high school to the university, and to the detriment of TVET. In your estimation, I just want to find out, in what percentages should we be looking at a combination of TVET and the regular education moving forward? An economy that is not really performing in terms of generating employment in the manufacturing and industry. What do you think?
I'm now even double. We can necessarily put a figure on it, not at this point in time anyway. I think what we've got to do is get that understanding that it's the skills economy and the knowledge economy that is making us economically productive in a country, and thinking about what do we manufacture? Where do our skills lie? What are we doing in terms of then thinking about, well, what route should we be thinking about in terms, or what percentage should we be taking in terms of higher education and the TVET route? I mean, you know, you could look to countries like the Netherlands, for instance, which have a much coordinated labour market and are very clear on the percentage of students that go into higher education, because they look at their labour forecasting and the needs of what they will need. And so they take X% medical students because they realise they're going to need X% of doctors. I mean, it's not a perfect, because, you know, if they're short on GPs, then they're expecting everyone to become a GP rather than, you know, a neurosurgeon or something. But I'm not sure that you can actually put a figure on it until we begin to actually recognise in not only policy but societal terms that both make up a strong economy. And what we've got to do is have viable options for our young people to want to be entering into those routes. And at the moment, there are just very few countries where we have those two viable options. You have the two options, but whether they're viable for the numbers of young people who should and would want to enter the vocational route is, I think, the open question. I've avoided answering your question, but I hope that does give you something to go with.
Yeah, I think he did ask you a really hard question. And I have now given speaking rights to someone else who's already asked you a hard question, and he's going to ask you another one. And that is Pandalani. So Pandalani, come in and let's hear you. And I think we'll end it on this one. It's a great question. It's a really important question for everyone thinking about TVET and skills, because it's leading us in the towards where we need to be going in terms of changing our economies. So Pandalani, I'm giving you the floor as the last questioner.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Steph. Maybe actually to the presenter, why I'm asking this question, I work for the Department of Environmental Affairs.
Sorry, Pandalani, can we just check? I don't know if Susan saw the question in the Q&A, so if you can repeat the question as well.
Okay, actually, what I wanted to find out on the work that you're doing as the World Skills International, where you're looking at scale, I wanted to find out if you're only looking at skills from a traditional linear economies, especially because you were emphasizing issues of productivity and growth, which is well and good. But however, when one looks at TVET schools, I started to think around if there is any work possibly that you're doing linked to World Skills International that is looking at VET skills as maybe a possible base to build skills for circular economies, especially given that the International Panel on Climate Change has just published the latest or the 6th assessment report that is showing a dire situation wherein the climate change report is showing that systems are actually crumbling given the increased greenhouse gases effect. And then when one is thinking about the nature of work under vocational education, that it's about producing products and services that we draw from the environment. So how about, instead of just looking at skills for productivity and growth, how do we amongst that ensure that we're transitioning towards more circular economies where we talk of sustainable productivity, sustainable growth? Thank you.
That is an excellent question to end on. And Pandalani, thank you so much for asking.
Before you end, Susan, just to say that there are other questions in the chat, and I'm really sorry to those people who we're not going to get to. There are also important questions, and all questions and quality of TVET systems, but we're not going to be able to get to any more today. And I know that you won't be able to answer this one completely, Susan. Obviously, it's a really hard question. But any thoughts that you have, I think would be appreciated, because it's something that's confronting all of us. And then Prisha will close after you've finished.
Thanks, Steph. I'll be quick. On the issue of parity of esteem, I've just had an article published in the Oxford Review of Education on it, about how it's a term of political rhetoric. So if you would like a copy of that, I can email you one. Just drop me an email, and happy to have further discussions offline or off this seminar around that. Pendleton, to answer your question, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the 60 odd skills that World Skills International have as their main competitions need to take that into account. So World Skills International as an organization, their board meets on a reasonably regular basis, and they are consistently and constantly looking at the skills that are incorporated into the competitions. One of the things that they have to be very conscious of is that the vast number of their member countries could actually compete in that skill if they wanted to. And I think part of the difficulty is getting to grips with what skills we are actually going to need going forward. We can't even seem to, get a definition of what green skills are and what countries are committing to, let alone thinking about what skills would be in the World Skills competition. One of the things that I'm really pleased about is Ben Blackledge, who is Deputy CEO of World Skills UK, is now on the board, and he is very interested in this. And what he wants to do is, maybe it's tricky to get a new skill introduced, but actually get into the judging criteria where sustainability and climate change factors are being taken into account. So we might not see huge shifts in the skills that are being competed, but we will see elements within that that are affecting that. How can those existing occupations, how do they need to change, and how can we take account of that? But it's a great final question. My answer has not done it justice. I'm sorry.
Okay, Susan, that's a good note to end on. And we look forward to the next discussion with you on green skills.
We've got a project at the moment.
I saw that on your website, so it's definitely something I'll be emailing you about, and we can have a chat. Did you see our new book?
Yes, I did. I did.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So Susan, thank you so much again from everyone at Real. We really enjoyed your seminar, and as you can see, it's really got some discussion going and many questions. So we hope you're going to be visiting us soon and join us on our seminar series again next year, but also think about coming and really visiting us again at Real this time, and hopefully we can enjoy it in person. Colleagues, to everyone that attended, thank you so much. We appreciate your participation in the webinar. Just to repeat, the recording of the webinar, and it will be sent out, will be on the Real YouTube channel. All 9 webinars in the series are on the YouTube channel, so we invite you to view the recording there. With that, take care. Thank you again, Susan. Keep well. See you soon.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.
Thanks, Prisha. And as soon as the borders open up, I'll be on the plane ready to come and visit. I can't wait to see you again.
Yeah, no, we would really love that. But I actually, when I saw the Green Skills project, I said, oh, that's so exciting. I must mail Susan about it, but we must have a chat.
Yeah, that would be great. We'll organize a team or a Zoom, and I noticed that Mike is in the audience. Mike's a research officer who's working on it as well, one of Lisa's students. So it would be great to talk about it. It's with the Edge Foundation. I think it'll be interesting.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. Take care.
Good. Have a good evening. Bye.
Bye-bye.